So you have translated many of Putin's speeches. You have family in Russia, I understand, if I remember correctly.
Sure, and in
certainly
Ukraine.
What does a good deal for Russia look like? What, from their point of view, do you think will be sufficient for them to end the war?
Well, the land acquisitions that they've made are significant for... It's kind of symbolically very significant. So what they've done is they've got the land bridge to Crimea. In other words, Crimea, which they annexed in 2014, was effectively cut off by land from Russia. There is the bridge, which we saw some explosions on during the course of this war, that connects the Crimea to the Russian mainland. But now they have an actual land bridge, which means all the bit along the coast of the Black Sea, which is very significant. So if Vladimir Putin can say, we prevented Ukraine from joining NATO, we got a land bridge to Crimea, and we've got our people, our Russian speakers are now safe in that part of the world, etc. That's a win. I believe their arguments about the risk of escalation by having peacekeepers on the border is something that is a flexible demand as opposed to an absolute red line. And that's really what all these negotiations are going to be about, ultimately. Because the Ukrainians know that if they sign a peace deal that doesn't give them permanent security, all they're doing is selling their people down the river, where they're going to end up in this exact same position down the line.
Does it matter that the potential boots on the ground would be NATO related?
Who else is it going to be? Is it going to be Nigeria? I mean, come on. Which nations are going to be a credible deterrent to Russia on that border?
But from the point of view of the Russian, I mean,
they're not going to like
that.
They're not going to like that, of course. But in order for this deal to be done, both sides are going to have to swallow a lot of things they don't want to swallow. Right. And you got to understand as well, Putin is clearly in this scenario in the stronger position, undoubtedly. But it's not like the appetite.
He's in a stronger position. Why?
Because he's winning on the ground. His troops are winning the battle. Right. He's taken land, and he now has in the White House someone who has no appetite for backing Zelensky at all. So he's got the upper hand. But at the same time, it's not like the war is super popular in Russia. It's not like they want it to keep going. It's not like they want to lose more men and spend more money and create more geopolitical discontent. It's not like they want this war to keep going either. So in the interest of actually having peace, both sides are going to have to give something up. Now, I may be wrong. The Russians may feel like they're in such a strong position, particularly with Trump in the White House, that they can get everything. They can get no security for Ukraine and the land and everything else that they want. I hope that's not the case because, as I say, I think that would be a very bad thing for the world, not just for Ukraine and for the West.
Forgive me for asking a sort of broader question, but there's something I've never fully understood and have got different messages on. But what do you think is the primary motivation of Putin? Some people will say he wants to take back the old Russian Empire. European leaders will say that if there's not a proper deterrent, he'll try and this is a threat to all of Europe's sovereignty. The former Soviet states he might go for. There's the Baltic states as well. How can we really understand what Putin's motivations are?
Well, first of all, nobody actually knows except people who talk to him directly. You have to listen to the things that he says. And you also have to look at Russia geostrategically and in history. Now, what is Russia? Russia originated as the Duchy of Muscovy, which was one of the duchies in what we now call the Russian area, right? There were other duchies in that area too. And because of the geography of that area, it was always very vulnerable. So what the Duchy of Muscovy did is it expanded by acquiring into itself and subjugating its neighboring tribes. And the reason it has to do that is it's trying to find a natural place that would make it safe from invasion. Russia is very vulnerable to invasion. The 80% of Russia's industrial base, a very significant portion of its population, basically most of its economic activity, other than digging stuff out of the ground, which is obviously a huge part of it, is all concentrated in the western 20% of Russia, which has been invaded by everyone from Napoleon to Hitler to the Poles to the Swedes, everybody. So Russia's natural instinct is always going to be to push west to positions that it's capable of defending. It's one of the reasons that Russia's great ambition in Ukraine is to cut Ukraine off from the Black Sea, because what that does is it reduces the border that Russia has with any potential adversary. So Russia's natural inclination is always going to be to expand to positions that it can defend, to mountain ranges, to seas, etc. So it's one of the reasons that the Baltic states, for example, are always going to be a natural aspiration for Russia, because it means that area is safer as a result. Now, does that mean that Vladimir Putin is going to invade NATO? Well, I think he'd be pretty foolish to do so, given that NATO is a nuclear alliance. But if the Americans take NATO apart, then what possible reason would he have not to recover Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and other countries? This is where we come back to my point about the risk of nuclear proliferation. If you take away the American nuclear umbrella from all the countries in Eastern Europe, why on earth would Poland and other countries in that region not immediately pursue nuclear weapons? What would be the possible reason to do that? So, is anybody saying that once he's finished with Ukraine, Vladimir Putin is going to go and invade Poland while it's in NATO? I don't think that's true. But that's also partly as a result of the fact that he's been fought to a standstill in Ukraine and lost a hell of a lot of men. The Ukrainians were right to make a stand, I think. But would Vladimir Putin like to be remembered as the man who rebuilt the Russian Empire? Of course he would be. Of course he would be. Now, does that mean that he would go to war with NATO? I don't think so. But his aspiration, of course, is that. And he views Ukraine as an illegitimate country that should never have been allowed to come into existence. And I don't know if you've had a chance to watch it. We published an interview with my dad on trigonometry. My dad was in charge, to a small extent, of Russia's foreign policy towards its nearby countries. And if you talk to my dad, I mean, he's very clear. His department was charged with rebuilding the Soviet Union. That's what they would. That was their stated objective under Boris Yeltsin, who was a far more liberal president of Russia than Vladimir Putin. So Russia will always seek to reacquire those lands or reacquire control of them by any means necessary. And if you read people like Alexander Dugin, who's become very popular with some people in America these days.
I haven't read Dugin, so maybe you can give me a...
Well, he wrote a book, and he wrote many books, but he wrote a book in 1997, or it was published in 1997. This is before Vladimir Putin came to power, which is a kind of Machiavellian The Prince style book. Part of it is historical analysis, and part of it is essentially a manual for running Russia. And he's very clear. Russia, he is part of a movement in Russia that represents something called Eurasianism. And the idea essentially is that Russia needs what America has, which is complete dominance over its continent, i.e. complete dominance over Eurasia. That is everything from the east to the south to Iran. Russia is now very close friends with Iran. Russia is close friends with China. To the west. It needs to dominate the entire continent. Otherwise, it can't survive. Otherwise, it will always be vulnerable to invasion, and any invasion of Russia will always lead to a nuclear holocaust and blah, 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 blah. That's why Russia needs to secure its own continent. Now, am I saying that Vladimir Putin has the ambition that Stalin had, which is for the Soviet soldiers to, as he said, wash their boots in the English Channel? I don't think that's achievable in the current geopolitical environment. But as I say, if you take apart NATO, Alexander Dugin's theory is that Russia needs to dominate Eurasia in order to survive, and there are some geographical reasons why that's not untrue, in the sense that Russia will always be vulnerable until it reaches a point in the West where it's actually defendable. So that will be a lot of the rationale behind it, and personal greatness and all of these things. They all come together.